Captain Riley stood on the bridge of the horizon, watching as the stars streaked past in a blur of motion. The ship was heading deep into uncharted space, bound for a meeting that could change the future of humanity forever. They were not going to fight. They weren't even going for negotiations. This was a mission of peace, something new, something the human race had rarely tried with alien civilizations. The Kaldorian Dominion had reached out first, inviting Earth to discuss trade, technology, and mutual defense. Captain Riley knew this was an opportunity humanity couldn't afford to miss. "Coordinates locked in, Captain," Lieutenant Daniels called out, his fingers dancing over the console. "Excellent," Riley replied, turning away from the view. "Prepare for entry into Kaldorian space, and everyone, stay sharp." The Horizon was the United Earth Alliance's most advanced vessel, built for diplomacy, not war. Its sleek, white exterior gleamed under the dim lights of the bridge, and its crew was a mix of soldiers, scientists, and diplomats. The atmosphere was tense, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. Riley had read the files. The Kaldorians were an advanced species, their technology far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. But no one really knew what they were like. Their culture was shrouded in mystery, and their previous contact with other species had been minimal and often hostile. As the ship passed through the outer boundary of Kaldorian space, the crew began their final preparations. Dr. Lang, the chief scientist, sat in the research lab, reviewing data on Kaldorian biology and technology. Mia, the cultural liaison officer, was busy going over the diplomatic script, making sure the humans didn't make any social missteps. And Grant, the chief engineer, was checking the ship's systems one last time. Riley had faith in their team. They had trained for this moment for months. But deep down, a part of him couldn't help but wonder, was this too good to be true? Could a peaceful meeting with such a powerful species really work out? The answer, Riley would soon find, was more complicated than anyone could have imagined. As the Horizon entered the Kaldorian system, the vastness of the planet before them took the crew's breath away. Kaldor Prime, the homeworld of the Kaldorians, was a massive, beautiful planet with oceans that shimmered like liquid silver and towering cities that seemed to float above the surface. It looked like a paradise. Everything was perfect. And yet there was something unsettling about the stillness. The humans were welcomed into orbit by a fleet of Kaldorian ships. They didn't look like the warships Riley had been expecting. The ships were sleek, almost elegant, with long, smooth lines and glowing lights. They weren't designed for intimidation, but for awe. They were designed to make a statement. This was a civilization that had mastered the art of power and peace, and they knew it. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," Daniel said. "On screen," Riley ordered, his voice calm but with an edge of excitement. The face of the Kaldorian ambassador appeared on the screen. He had a smooth, almost metallic skin tone that shimmered faintly in the light. His eyes were dark and deep, betraying no emotion. His voice, when he spoke, was soft but commanding. "Welcome, Captain Riley. Earth is an honored guest in our system. We await your arrival at Kaldor Station." Riley didn't know what to make of the words. The Kaldorian's tone was neutral, polite even, but there was something cold behind it. He nodded, trying to mask any hint of doubt. "We appreciate your hospitality, Ambassador," Riley said. "We're looking forward to the discussions." As the Horizon moved closer to Kaldor Station, Riley couldn't help but feel a twinge of nervousness. Despite the outwardly warm welcome, the Kaldorians had always been difficult to read. No one knew for sure what their true intentions were. Their sudden invitation to meet was a sign of progress, but it was also a sign of something else, something Riley wasn't sure he understood. "All systems are green, Captain," Grant reported from engineering. "Good," Riley said. "Let's keep it that way. We'll make contact on their terms for now. Stay alert, everyone." The ship docked at Kaldor Station, and the humans disembarked with their heads held high. The station was a marvel of alien architecture. Its walls were smooth, metallic, and seamless, reflecting light from strange energy sources. It was clear that the Kaldorians didn't just build, they sculpted, creating spaces that felt more like works of art than simple structures. The Kaldorian delegation met the humans at the airlock. The ambassador was there, along with several others who Riley assumed were officials of some kind. They were all tall, graceful beings, their movements deliberate and calculated. As Riley and his crew stepped forward, the air seemed to grow thicker, more charged with tension. Mia, who had studied the Kaldorian culture for years, whispered to Riley, "Their body language is hard to read, but they're not hostile. At least not yet." Riley nodded but didn't say anything. It was clear that the Kaldorians were trying to gauge them, just as much as they were trying to gauge the Kaldorians. The ambassador extended a hand, an odd gesture, given that Kaldorians typically communicated through telepathy. Still, it seemed important, so Riley shook it, feeling the cool, metallic texture of their skin. "It is an honor to meet you, Captain Riley," the ambassador said. "We hope this meeting will be the beginning of a long and prosperous relationship between our species." Riley nodded, offering a smile, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Everything seemed too perfect, too calculated. But for now, he had no choice but to go along with it. "We are ready for the discussions," Riley said, hoping his voice didn't betray his inner doubts. As they moved deeper into the station, the crew began to notice subtle signs of unease. The Kaldorian smiles seemed a little too wide, their eyes too focused. But for the moment, everything was still calm. Unbeknownst to Riley, however, this mission of peace was about to take a very different turn. The Horizon crew settled into their temporary quarters aboard Kaldor Station, a gleaming structure suspended in the void. Everything looked pristine, too pristine. Captain Riley paced slowly in his room, his mind racing. The warmth of the welcome was still fresh in his memory, but something felt off. He couldn't put his finger on it yet, but he was certain that the Kaldorians were hiding something. Mia sat at her desk, running through her notes. The Kaldorians were experts in diplomacy, but they were also known for being calculating, never revealing their true intentions too soon. The cultural liaison officer had studied their history for years, but even now, she found herself second-guessing everything. "Captain, I've been looking over the data we were given on Kaldorian history," Maya said, standing and walking over to Riley. "Something doesn't add up. There are entire sections of their history that are missing. It's like they've erased parts of their past." Riley stopped pacing and turned to her. "What do you mean missing?" "I've gone through the records 3 times, Mia explained, her voice tense. "There are huge gaps, long periods of time that no one talks about. No battles, no political shifts. It's as if those years never existed." Riley's brow furrowed. Could it be a mistake? Maybe outdated records? "No," Maya shook her head. "The records are too well maintained to be mistakes. This is deliberate." Captain Riley didn't like where this was going. The Kaldorians had been a closed-off species for centuries, but they had made it clear they wanted peace. But why the secrecy? What were they hiding? "Keep digging, Mia. We need to know everything we can about them before we make any decisions," Riley ordered, his voice steady but firm. Meanwhile, in the ship's engineering bay, Chief Engineer Grant was going through routine diagnostics on the Horizon systems. Everything appeared to be functioning perfectly, but the hair on the back of his neck stood up. As he checked the ship's communication systems, something odd caught his attention. A subtle interference, like static, messing with their comms. "Not right," Grant muttered under his breath, tapping away at his console. He checked and rechecked the settings, but the interference remained. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was listening in, or worse, blocking their signals. The Kaldorians had access to technology that was far more advanced than anything humanity had, but this felt different. Something was tampering with their equipment. He knew he had to bring it to Riley's attention. But before he could send the report, The station's lights flickered, casting long shadows across the room. It was as if the entire station took a deep, silent breath. Back in the meeting chambers, the Kaldorians had grown quieter. The initial enthusiasm for peace talks had faded slightly, replaced by an uncomfortable stillness. The ambassador, who had once been so welcoming, now appeared almost distant. His eyes, though still glowing faintly, seemed colder, more calculating. As the humans sat down for their scheduled dinner with the Kaldorian delegation, the room felt too perfect. The table was set with strange, otherworldly foods, the plates glittering with unusual patterns. The air smelled fresh, almost sterile. Riley noticed the way the Kaldorians ate, carefully, almost mechanically, as though they were studying each bite. It felt rehearsed, as if they were playing a part. Riley caught Mia's eye across the table. She was trying to read the room, but like him, she was growing more suspicious. This wasn't just a meeting of two civilizations. There was something deeper at play. "We trust you are enjoying our cuisine," the ambassador said smoothly, breaking the silence. His voice was pleasant, but there was something in it that made Riley's skin crawl. "Yes, it's unlike anything we've ever tasted," Riley said, forcing a smile. "Very unique." The ambassador's smile was tight, almost imperceptible. "We are glad you find it suitable." The meal continued in silence, but the unease in the room was palpable. Then, just as Riley was about to speak, an alarm blared throughout the station. The lights dimmed for a moment, and the walls seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. "We are experiencing minor technical difficulties," the ambassador said, standing up with a calm that seemed out of place. "Please, excuse us for the interruption." Before anyone could react, the Kaldorian guards in the room shifted. Their posture became rigid, and they stepped forward, surrounding the humans. Riley's heart skipped a beat. "Captain, what's happening?" Mia whispered urgently, her hand inching toward her communicator. Riley didn't answer. His mind was racing. This wasn't a malfunction. This was a trap. "I believe you are all under arrest," the ambassador said flatly, his expression never changing. The human delegation froze. What had started as a peaceful mission was now turning into a nightmare. Riley's instincts screamed at him to act, but the Kaldorian soldiers were already moving, taking control of the room with a swift, practiced efficiency. "Stay calm," Riley said, his voice low, his mind already calculating their next move. "Don't do anything unless I say so." The guards moved in, their movements smooth, and with precise coordination, they began to disarm the humans. Riley realized they'd been too trusting. They hadn't considered that the Kaldorians might have had other plans. They hadn't considered that this peace mission was a facade. As the guards closed in, Riley's thoughts raced. The Kaldorians hadn't just invited humanity here for diplomacy. They had been preparing for something else entirely. And now, the horizon was cut off from the outside world, their comms jammed, and the crew under guard. The true nature of the mission was becoming painfully clear. The Kaldorians had invited them here not to talk, but to trap them. Back on the horizon, Grant had finished his diagnostic and was now working quickly to override the interference on the comms system. But it was no use. They were trapped, and he couldn't warn anyone in time. Riley looked at his crew, his people, and knew one thing for sure. The peace mission was over. Now they would have to fight for their survival. Captain Riley's heart raced as the Kaldorian guards moved closer, their steps deliberate and cold. The ambassador's words echoed in his mind. "You are all under arrest." The humans sat frozen, unsure of what was happening. Everything had seemed so perfect, so peaceful, but now it felt like a carefully staged lie. The Kaldorians weren't here to negotiate. They had invited humanity into their fold only to trap them. Riley knew they were in immediate danger. He looked around at his crew, Mia, Grant, Lang, and the others. They were caught off guard, but Riley's training kicked in. He had to stay calm, stay focused. "Don't move," Riley whispered to his crew, his voice low but steady. "We need to think." The guards were now standing in front of the humans, their weapons ready, though they hadn't raised them yet. The ambassador seemed to be waiting for something, his eyes never leaving Riley's. Riley could sense that the Kaldorians weren't in a hurry. They were playing a game, and they were in control. It was a game of power, and the humans were losing. Riley knew the horizon was a sitting target. Without communication or any way to call for help, the ship was completely vulnerable. If the Kaldorians had already prepared a trap for them, it wouldn't be long before the situation worsened. "We've been deceived," Riley said quietly, turning toward Mia. "They never planned for peace." Mia nodded, her face pale but determined. "They must have planned this all along. The invitation, the false kindness, it was all to lure us in." The ambassador stepped forward, his gaze still fixed on Riley. "It's unfortunate that you misunderstood our intentions, Captain. But now you will learn why peace was never an option." Riley's mind raced. He needed to buy time. "What do you want from us?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We came here to negotiate, to offer peace. Why attack us?" The ambassador's lips curled into a thin smile. "Peace was never the goal. We have no need for your resources or your technology. We do, however, need to ensure the stability of our dominion. Humanity is unpredictable. You have a history of interference in the affairs of others, Captain. You are a threat to our way of life." Riley clenched his fists. He had suspected the Kaldorians weren't as noble as they seemed, but to hear it straight from their leader's mouth was another thing entirely. The Kaldorians didn't want peace. They didn't want cooperation. They wanted control. Before Riley could respond, a sharp voice came from behind him. "Captain, we need to move," Grant said urgently. "The interference on our ship isn't just random. Someone is jamming our comms, and I can't get a signal through. We're completely isolated." Riley's pulse quickened. If they couldn't communicate with the horizon, they had no backup. No reinforcements. They were on their own. Maya stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room. "We have to find a way out of here," she said, her voice calm but filled with resolve. "We can't let them take us without a fight." The ambassador's expression didn't change. "Escape is not an option," he said coolly. "We are well prepared for your resistance. This station is under our complete control." As the Kaldorians spoke, the atmosphere shifted. The soldiers around the room grew tense, their hands tightening on their weapons. The humans could feel it. This was no longer a diplomatic exchange. This was an invasion. They were prisoners, caught in the Kaldorians' web, and the worst part was that they hadn't seen it coming. Riley's mind raced. If they were going to get out of this alive, they had to act fast. "Grant," he said in a low voice, "can you get the ship's weapons online?" Grant hesitated. "Not without the communication systems working. And even then, we'd be outgunned. We can't fight a whole fleet with just what's left of the Horizon systems." The reality of the situation set in. They had no external communication, no weapons, and no way of calling for help. The Kaldorians had them trapped, and they were running out of time. Captain Riley's gaze shifted from Grant to Mia, and then to Lang. The scientist had been working quietly in the corner, staring at a datapad, his brow furrowed in concentration. Riley approached him. "Lang, what's the status on the Kaldorian tech?" Riley asked, his voice a mix of urgency and curiosity. Lang looked up, his face pale. "It's advanced, more advanced than anything we've seen. But—" he paused, his fingers tapping the datapad. "There's something here, a pattern in their data streams. It looks like their systems are all interconnected. If we could access the central network, we might be able to disable them." Riley felt a spark of hope. "How do we do that?" Lang's eyes flickered toward the Kaldorians. "We'll need to get into the main control room. But it won't be easy. They're monitoring everything. And if we're caught—" "We'll be caught," Riley finished for him. "But it's the only chance we've got." The humans exchanged grim looks. There was no time to waste. They would have to act fast before the Kaldorians grew more suspicious. The plan was dangerous, risky, but it was their only option. As Riley and his team began to move toward the door, the Kaldorian ambassador's voice rang out. "I wouldn't try to escape if I were you," he said, his tone icy. "We have already neutralized all your systems. You cannot fight us." But Riley wasn't listening anymore. They had nothing left to lose. They were going to fight back, not just for survival, but for the future of humanity. The Kaldorians had made one big mistake. They had underestimated humanity's will to survive. The hallway outside the meeting room was eerily quiet. The soft hum of the station's power systems was the only sound that could be heard. Riley and his crew moved swiftly, staying close to the walls to avoid being seen by the Kaldorian guards. The plan was risky, but it was their only shot at freedom. They had to reach the central control room, where they could disable the Kaldorian systems and gain back control of their own ship. "We need to be fast," Riley whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "The longer we stay here, the more dangerous it gets." Mia nodded. "Right. We can't afford to be caught. We need to get into their network and disable the jamming systems. Once we do that, we'll have a chance to call for help." The group moved quickly, avoiding the main corridors where they could easily be spotted. Grant led the way, using his knowledge of the station's layout to guide them toward a side passage. Lang followed closely behind, his eyes darting around nervously. As they reached an intersection, Riley held up his hand, signaling for everyone to stop. There was a faint sound coming from around the corner, a faint clinking of armor. Kaldorian guards were approaching. Riley motioned for everyone to crouch down, hiding behind the walls. The guards passed by without noticing them, their footsteps echoing as they moved in the opposite direction. "Close," Maya whispered, her breath shaky. That was too close. Riley didn't respond, his focus locked on the path ahead. Every step was a risk now. Every second they remained inside the Kaldorian station made it more likely they would be discovered. They couldn't afford any more mistakes. After a few tense moments, they arrived at an access panel near the central control room. Grant quickly got to work, his hands moving swiftly over the interface as he attempted to bypass the security. "This is going to take a minute," Grant muttered, his fingers flying over the keys. "The encryption is much tougher than I expected. I might need some time." "No time," Riley replied sharply, scanning the area. "If they find us here, we're done." "I know," Grant said, his voice strained as he continued to work. "I just need a few more seconds." The sound of footsteps echoed again, growing louder. Riley tensed, his eyes flicking to the nearest exit. There was no way they would make it out if the guards came around the corner. Suddenly, Lang stepped forward. "We can buy some time," he said, his voice calm but with a hint of urgency. "I have an idea." Riley looked at him. "What are you thinking?" "I'll create a distraction," Lang said, glancing at the access panel. "I can hack into the station's surveillance system. It won't take them long to notice something's wrong, but it'll be enough for us to get inside the control room." Riley hesitated for a moment. It was a risky move, but they didn't have many options left. "Do it." Lang immediately moved toward the terminal, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. Riley could see the tension in Lang's face as he worked, sweat beading on his forehead. Minutes felt like hours as they waited. Riley's heart pounded in his chest. Every sound in the station made him jump, and every passing moment brought them closer to being discovered. Finally, Lang gave a nod. "It's done," he said. "The security cameras are looped. We've got about 2 minutes before they notice." Without wasting a second, Riley motioned for the team to move. They quickly slipped inside the control room, the door hissing open as they entered. Inside, the room was filled with glowing screens and strange alien equipment. The walls were lined with interfaces, and the air smelled sterile, almost like metal and ozone. At the center of the room, a large console stood, Surrounded by multiple terminals, Riley felt a surge of hope. This was their chance. Grant immediately moved to the console, his eyes scanning the controls. "We need to disable the jamming systems first," he said. "Once we do that, we can call for backup." Lang took a seat at one of the terminals, his fingers moving quickly across the alien keyboard. The complex symbols on the screen were unlike anything he had seen before, but the general layout of the system was similar to the Horizon's own controls. With a bit of luck, he might be able to reverse engineer it. "This is more advanced than anything I've worked on before," Lang muttered, his voice tight with concentration. "But I think I can manage it." "Just hurry," Riley urged, his eyes scanning the control room. They weren't out of danger yet. The Kaldorians would soon realize something was wrong, and when they did, they would send reinforcements. Grant continued to work on the main console, his hands moving in a blur. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he typed commands, trying to locate the source of the interference. The seconds dragged by, each one heavier than the last. Suddenly, Lang let out a sharp breath. "I've got it. The jamming system is offline." Grant quickly typed in a series of commands, his eyes fixed on the screen. "We're still not out of the woods. I need to reroute the power to the comm systems." The sound of boots echoed down the hall, getting closer. Riley's pulse quickened. They had less than a minute before the Kaldorians would be on top of them. "Grant," Riley snapped. "We don't have much time." With a final, desperate move, Grant slammed his hand down on the console. "Done. We have full access to the communications now." Riley wasted no time. He grabbed his communicator and quickly sent a distress signal to the Horizon, hoping against hope that the jamming systems hadn't caused too much damage. The response came almost immediately. "This is the Horizon. We're receiving your signal. Captain, what's your status?" Riley let out a breath of relief. "We're still alive. We need backup now. The Kaldorians are trying to take us." "Understood. We'll be there in minutes." "Hold on, Captain." Riley turned to his crew, a sense of hope returning for the first time since the trap had been sprung. "We're not done yet. We fight back now." As the sound of approaching Kaldorian footsteps grew louder, Riley knew that they had just bought themselves a chance, one that they were going to take with everything they had. The fight for survival had just begun. The seconds felt like hours as Riley and his crew waited in the central control room. The sound of Kaldorian boots echoed in the hall, growing louder with each passing moment. The backup they had called for was still minutes away, and in that time, they had to hold their ground. Grant wiped sweat from his brow, his fingers still hovering over the terminal, eyes glued to the screen. "The comms are up, but we're not in the clear yet," he muttered. "If they find us here, we're outnumbered." Riley took a deep breath, his mind racing. "We need to be ready. If we're going to fight back, it's now or never." Mia stood by the door, her body tense, eyes constantly scanning the shadows. "We can't let them take us alive. Whatever happens, we have to make sure they don't have the upper hand." Lang, who had been studying the Kaldorian system's data, looked up from his terminal, his face pale but determined. "The station's power grid is connected to their entire security system. If we can disable it, we can stop their reinforcements from reaching us." Riley's gaze hardened. "How long will it take?" Lang's fingers moved rapidly over the controls. 5 minutes, maybe less. But we need to keep them out of this room until then." There was no time to lose. Riley took his place at the door, positioning himself as a lookout. "Grant, Lang, keep working. Maya and I will hold the line." Mia nodded, and the two of them took up positions beside the door, ready for whatever came next. Their mission had shifted from diplomacy to survival, and they had to be prepared for anything. The sound of footsteps grew louder. Riley's heart raced as he gripped his weapon tightly. He could hear voices now, Kaldorian voices, speaking in low, harsh tones as they neared. They were almost there. Then, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Riley's breath caught in his throat. 4 Kaldorian guards stepped into the control room, their weapons raised and their eyes scanning the room. The humans had barely enough time to react before the guards fired. Riley dove to the side, narrowly avoiding a blast. The room erupted into chaos as the humans returned fire. Maya shot first, hitting one of the guards in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. Grant, who had been crouched behind a console, fired his weapon next, taking out another guard in a single shot. But the remaining 2 Kaldorians were fast, ducking behind the columns and returning fire with deadly precision. Riley's heart pounded as he moved to cover, keeping his head low. He could feel the heat of the blaster bolts as they flew past him, narrowly missing. Maya fired again, hitting one of the Kaldorians in the shoulder, but he quickly recovered and returned fire. The blast knocked Mia off her feet, sending her crashing to the ground. "Mia!" Riley shouted, fear flashing in his eyes. But Mia wasn't down for long. She rolled to her feet, firing again. This time, she hit the Kaldorian square in the chest, sending him flying backward. Riley felt a sense of relief, but there was no time to dwell on it. The last Kaldorian guard was still standing, his weapon aimed at Grant, who was exposed. Riley reacted instinctively, aiming his weapon at the guard and firing. The shot hit the guard's arm, sending him stumbling back, his weapon falling to the floor. But the Kaldorians weren't done yet. Riley heard more footsteps coming from down the hall. More guards were on their way. "We need to finish this now," Grant shouted. "Lang, how's the power grid?" Lang didn't look up from the console, his fingers still moving rapidly over the controls. "Almost there. Just a few more seconds." Riley glanced at Mia, his face grim. "We don't have time for seconds. We got to hold them off until Lang finishes." The door slid open again, and 2 more Kaldorian soldiers stepped into the room. They raised their weapons, but this time, the humans were ready. Riley dove for cover and fired, taking out one of the soldiers in a quick shot. Maya and Grant followed suit, their weapons flashing in the dim light. It felt like an eternity as the battle raged on, the air thick with the smell of burned metal and the sounds of weapons fire. Grant hit the final guard in the leg, forcing him to drop to the ground with a loud cry of pain. But before the humans could take a breath, more Kaldorian soldiers arrived. This time, there were at least 6 of them. The humans had fought hard, but they were running out of ammunition, and the Kaldorians were coming in waves. They needed a way out, and they needed it fast. "We can't keep this up," Riley shouted, his voice filled with frustration. "Lang, what's the holdup?" Lang's face was tense, but he didn't look up. "Just a few more seconds," he said. "Almost there." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps stopped. The remaining Kaldorians were confused, looking around the control room. Something was wrong. Riley's heart skipped a beat. He turned quickly, his eyes darting to Lang's terminal. The lights in the control room flickered, then went dark for a brief moment. The Kaldorians glanced nervously at each other, unsure of what was happening. Then the station's alarms blared. "We're losing power," Grant shouted. Lang grinned. "I did it. The power grid is offline. They won't be able to send reinforcements now." Riley's breath was ragged as he stepped forward. "We're not safe yet, but this is our chance. We push forward now." Just as the Kaldorians scrambled to respond, the door to the control room burst open again. This time, it wasn't more soldiers. It was the sound of Horizon's weapons firing outside the station. The ship had arrived. Riley's heart surged with hope as the Kaldorians froze, momentarily distracted by the incoming assault. This was it, their one opportunity to escape. "Everyone, move," Riley ordered. The humans didn't hesitate. They ran for the exit, weapons raised, ready for whatever the Kaldorians might throw at them. Outside, they could see the Horizon's weapons lighting up the station's defenses, causing chaos throughout the station. As they made their way down the corridors toward the Horizon, Riley knew one thing. The fight was far from over, But humanity had just struck a serious blow against the Kaldorians. They were fighting back, and they weren't going down without a fight. The escape from the control room was a blur of movement, adrenaline, and the sound of blaster fire echoing down the station's cold, metallic halls. Riley's heart raced as he led his team toward the horizon. The Kaldorians were in chaos, but that didn't mean they were beaten. They would regroup, they would retaliate, and Riley knew they had to reach their ship before that happened. "Keep moving," Riley shouted, his voice sharp as they rounded a corner, nearly colliding with a wall. The sound of Kaldorian boots on the floor grew closer, but for now, they were safe. For now, the horizon had given them the chance they needed. The horizon wasn't just their ship, it was their lifeline. Without it, they were stranded in Kaldorian space, and Riley didn't intend to let that happen. They had fought hard for this moment, but the war was far from over. Mia was at the front, her weapon raised, eyes scanning every corner. Grant followed closely behind her, his face grim as he checked his blaster. Lang was next, still nervous but focused, his thoughts on the station's power grid and the systems they had just sabotaged. Riley brought up the rear, always looking behind them, expecting an ambush at any moment. "Riley," Maya said, her voice low, "we can't keep running like this. We need to find a way to slow them down." Riley nodded, understanding the urgency. "Lang, any chance you can trigger a station-wide lockdown?" Lang looked at him, his eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. I don't know. The systems are complicated. The power grid is down, but I don't know if I can access the lockdown protocols without being detected." "Do your best," Riley said, his voice firm. "Anything that buys us more time." They continued down the hallway, every step feeling like it might be their last. Then, without warning, a loud crash echoed from a nearby corridor. Riley's heart skipped a beat as a group of Kaldorian soldiers emerged from a side passage. They were too close, too many, and the humans were already exhausted from the previous fight. The Kaldorians raised their weapons, and Riley had only seconds to react. He dove for cover behind a console, pulling Mia with him. Grant followed suit, taking shelter behind a nearby pillar. Lang, however, froze in place, unsure of what to do. "Move!" Riley yelled, his voice filled with urgency. Lang snapped out of his stupor, diving behind a terminal just as the first shots rang out. The Kaldorians were fast, but the humans had been through too much to stop now. Riley fired first, hitting one of the guards in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. Maya fired next, striking another soldier in the leg, causing him to stumble. But there were more of them. Grant fired from behind his cover, his shots hitting their marks, but the Kaldorians weren't giving up so easily. Riley could see the fear in their eyes as they fought, but they were still dangerous. The humans couldn't afford to hesitate. "We can't stay here," Riley said through clenched teeth. "Lang, now would be a good time to work some magic." Lang's hands flew over the terminal screen, his face pale with concentration. I'm trying. A Kaldorian soldier stepped forward, aiming his weapon at Lang. Riley barely had time to react. He pushed himself up from behind cover and fired, hitting the soldier square in the chest. The Kaldorian collapsed, but Riley's heart was still pounding. They couldn't waste time. "Lang!" Riley shouted again. "What's the holdup?" Lang's face was grim as he looked up. "I've got access to the lockdown system, but I need a few more seconds to trigger it. I can't risk making a mistake." Another Kaldorian soldier stepped into view, firing at the humans. Maya shot back, hitting him in the shoulder. He fell, but there were still more behind him. "We don't have a few more seconds," Grant yelled, firing another round. "Just a few more," Lang repeated, his hands shaking as he worked. The Kaldorians were closing in. Riley could feel the walls closing in around them, but he couldn't give up. Not now. Then, just as Riley was about to give the order to retreat, the station's alarms blared once again. The lights flickered. The Kaldorians froze. Lang let out a breath of relief. It's done. The station is locked down. They won't be able to send reinforcements. Riley's heart soared, but the victory was short-lived. The Kaldorians had clearly been prepared for something like this. As soon as the lockdown was triggered, their movements became more deliberate. They knew where the humans were now. "Get to the ship," Riley ordered, his voice filled with urgency. With the lockdown in place, the humans had a slight advantage. The Kaldorians were trapped in their own security systems, but they were still dangerous. Riley knew they needed to move fast to capitalize on their advantage. The humans rushed down the hallway, ignoring the sound of Kaldorian soldiers regrouping behind them. Riley's mind raced. Each corner they turned, each step they took, the horizon felt farther away. But it was the only way out. "We can't keep running," Maya said, breathless. "We need a diversion." "We got one," Riley said, his voice cold. "We just need to get to the ship." The hallway ahead was filled with Kaldorian soldiers. They were waiting for them. Riley quickly scanned the area. There was no way to fight their way through. Not like this. "I have an idea," Grant said, eyes lighting up. "Lang, can you reverse the flow of energy in the next section of the station? If we can trigger a power surge, it will cause a chain reaction. They won't be able to control the station." Lang hesitated for a moment. "It's risky. I'll have to access the central power core. It could overload." "We don't have a choice," Riley said, his voice firm. "Do it." Lang didn't wait. They were almost there, but the Kaldorians were closing in fast. "Keep moving," Riley barked, his voice urgent. He could feel his breath growing ragged as they pushed forward. The horizon within sight. The ship's silhouette loomed ahead, its lights cutting through the darkness. It was their salvation, but it seemed so far away, especially with the Kaldorian forces regrouping. Mia, who was leading the way, turned briefly to check on the others. "We can't let them catch up. There's too many of them." "We'll make it," Riley replied, trying to sound confident, though doubt gnawed at him. He knew they were running on borrowed time. The Kaldorians would not stop until they were all dead or captured. Ahead of them, the door to the hangar bay was in sight. It was locked, but Lang, who was always quick with his fingers, moved up to the terminal. "I've got it," he muttered under his breath as his hands flew over the keyboard. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind them. The Kaldorians were almost upon them. Riley didn't dare look back. There was no time to check how close they were. They had to push forward with everything they had. "Lang," Grant shouted. "Hurry." "I'm almost there," Lang replied, his voice shaking slightly. "Just need a few more seconds to unlock the door." Riley could hear the Kaldorians yelling now, their boots clattering against the floor, getting closer with every passing second. They would be on them any moment. Then, with a satisfying beep, the door to the hangar bay slid open. "Go," Riley yelled. Mia was the first through the door, her weapon raised, scanning the hangar for any threats. She quickly cleared the area, motioning for the others to follow. Riley, Grant, and Lang quickly ran in after her. But as they moved further into the hangar, Riley's heart sank. There was no sign of the horizon. The space around them was empty. "What's going on?" Grant asked, his voice tight with worry. Riley's pulse quickened. They had called for backup, but there was no ship. The hangar was deserted. No, this can't be happening," Riley muttered. They had relied on the horizon to be there, but now they were stranded. "Riley, look," Mia shouted, pointing to the far end of the hangar. At the far end of the bay, barely visible behind the shadows, was a small shuttle, barely big enough to fit all of them. It was the emergency backup ship, the Starlight, a fast craft that could get them out of here. It wasn't as powerful or as heavily armed as the Horizon, but it would have to do. "They're not giving up," Grant said, looking back as the first wave of Kaldorian soldiers entered the hangar. "Get to the shuttle," Riley ordered, moving toward the craft. The team moved as fast as they could, running for the small ship. As they ran, blaster fire echoed around them, narrowly missing. The Kaldorians were closing in fast, and Riley could hear the sounds of reinforcements on their heels. Mia was the first to reach the shuttle. She immediately began powering it up, her fingers flying over the controls. Grant and Lang followed closely, jumping into the craft as Riley took one last look back. A dozen Kaldorian soldiers were now flooding into the hangar. Their weapons raised, they moved into position to trap the humans. Riley didn't hesitate. He turned and sprinted toward the shuttle. As he reached the door, he jumped inside, the ship's hatch closing just behind him. "Go!" Riley shouted, taking his seat at the controls. Mia was already in the pilot's seat, pushing buttons and pulling levers with practiced ease. The shuttle's engines roared to life as it shot off the ground. Riley could see the Kaldorians firing at them, but they were already rising too fast. The hangar doors slammed shut, and the shuttle shot out into space, narrowly avoiding enemy fire. The station behind them was growing smaller, but Riley's mind was still racing. The Kaldorians would not let them escape without a fight. They had to make sure they weren't followed. "We need to break away fast," Riley said, looking at the scanners. The Kaldorians would be able to send ships after them, but if they could just get out of the system, they might have a chance. Mia adjusted the shuttle's course, steering it toward the edge of the system. "I'm punching through their defenses," she said, "but we need to be careful. They'll be coming after us." Riley turned to Grant and Lang, who were still catching their breath from the battle. "You two, make sure the back is covered. If we're going to get out of here, we need all hands on deck." Grant nodded, his face grim. "Understood." Lang checked the weapons system and said, "I'll make sure we don't get followed." The shuttle sped through the blackness of space, its small size giving it an advantage in terms of speed. Riley's eyes were fixed on the scanners, watching as the Kaldorian ships began to move. The Kaldorians weren't giving up. They were fast, and their ships were more powerful. But the starlight was quicker. "Hold on," Mia called, pushing the shuttle to full speed. The Kaldorian ships fired a few shots, but the shuttle weaved through space, narrowly dodging the blasts. The space around them lit up with the trails of the Kaldorian weapons, but the starlight was too agile to catch. Riley glanced out of the window. In the distance, he could see the faint outline of the horizon, now emerging from the shadows. It was big and powerful, a symbol of humanity's strength. It had arrived just in time. "We're almost there," Riley said, his voice calm but filled with relief. "Stay focused. We've got this." Mia guided the shuttle toward the horizon, and within moments, the massive ship opened its hangar doors, ready to take them in. As they docked, the humans could finally breathe. They had made it. Against all odds, they had survived. But Riley knew that this was just the beginning. They had fought back, they had won, but the war was far from over. Humanity had proven one thing that day. They would never surrender. They would always fight back, no matter the odds. And this was only the start of the battle.